Hey guys, I wanted to make this video just to show any of you who are interested how I edit my videos in terms of the skits I do when I cut myself into the movie that I'm reviewing. This is one of my favorite things to do in editing when the opportunity arises, and it's really fun to kind of play around with the program and just see what's possible. What's interesting about this video is that I'm going to be using the new version of Final Cut Pro, which has tracking, and I'm going to be using that to track camera movement and apply it to my own footage to really make it look like I'm in the scene. So let's get started with the first kind of skit that I feature in the video. Now, normally how I would do this is I would take a screenshot from the film. I would duplicate that screenshot, and then on the top layer, I would draw a mask around the characters here. So I would have a top layer and then a background layer. Then what I would do is I'd take the footage of myself and I would sandwich that in between these two layers. Now, this is going to be much more challenging because this footage, as you can see, the camera actually moves. So this is actually a good opportunity to use the new tracking features in the new version of Final Cut Pro. And it's great that Final Cut finally has these tracking features. I used to use After Effects for all my tracking. Okay, so this is the scene that we're working with. I'm just gonna play it so that you can hear it.
I didn't know pilots were allowed to do things like that.
Not Air Force pilots, you're right. But Mitch is an electronics engineer. He may work for the government, but man, he kind of makes his own rules.
So does a 3-year-old child until his mother spanks him.
Mother, dear mother, I'm ready if you are.
So this actually works really well because there's the spot here where Mitch is talking through the radio and none of the characters in the room are speaking. So it's a good place to put my character into the shot. So I'm gonna do a cut right here and here. Basically, I'm gonna cut out when Sally's talking because it kind of runs on and we don't need it. So now, as you can see, there's gonna be a jump cut from when this guy's talking to the next shot where Mitch is talking through the radio and I'm gonna be in the scene. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take an adjustment layer. This is just a blank layer. I'm gonna put it over top of the cut. And then up here in the transform controls, I'm gonna scale it. So now it's punched in. So now when you play it back, it looks like it's another shot. It actually visually breaks up the scene. Okay, so this next clip, this is the one where he's talking, and I'm gonna be in this one. So I'm just gonna kill the audio completely on it. So the previous clip still has its original audio. So you would notice a sharp cutoff as it goes from clip to clip. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna zoom in here. I'm gonna hit the Option key, and I'm gonna set 2 keyframes. And then I'm just gonna do fade out here so that it just kind of curves and fades nicely. Okay, so the next clip, of course, is going to be the clip that I edit myself into. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy it and I'm gonna paste it so that there's a duplicate. So one of the clips here is gonna be our foreground. I'm just gonna select the second one here, designate that as the foreground clip, okay? So that's just gonna be the people. The one back here, the original, is going to be our background clip. And here's where the work starts. I'm gonna select a draw mask and I'm gonna put it onto the foreground clip. Now, I'm gonna have to draw the mask around all of the characters, or at least the parts of the frame that I'm going to be walking into. Okay, so I'm just going to click point to point all around each of the characters. I'm just gonna zoom in here, and it doesn't have to be exactly perfect because we're gonna feather it a bit in the end, but it's gonna take a really long time. So I'm just gonna fast forward through this whole thing. Okay, so now that we have a basic mask around our characters starting at the beginning of the clip, we're gonna go through frame by frame. We're gonna set a keyframe here at the beginning of the clip for our control points. And then we're gonna go through frame after frame and move each one of these control points as the characters move. Now, as you can imagine, this can take an extremely long time depending on how much movement there is. One of the things that I like to do while I'm doing this, especially because this footage is in black and white, is you go up to here to your titles, and under solids there's a vivid blue. Clip and drag that under the clip, and now you can see just by contrast the background is blue, and you can see just the edges of your control points, and it just gives you a good reference. Now, this whole process could take an extremely long time. I estimated that just masking over this clip took me about 12 hours. Depending on how many control points that you have, it can slow it down even more. I had too many control points, so it really slowed down the whole thing. Eventually what I did is I kind of went back and realized I didn't need to mask over the third guy here on the right, so I just masked over the general and over Sally here. Also, because this situation has a lot of rounded shapes, what I would recommend is going up to your draw mask menu here, and under shape type, instead of linear, we're going to pick B-spline. And what this is going to do is it's going to round the connections between the control points so it's not so jagged. Alright, so now that we got our mask around the two characters here, I'm going to select the background footage and hit V to re-enable it. I'm going to toss aside the vivid blue because I don't need it right now. Now I'm going to grab the piece of my footage that we're going to use, and I am going to put it in between the foreground clip and the background clip. So now you can see we have in the foreground the characters, and then there's me with the green screen. Once I key that out, you'll just have me sandwiched between the characters and the background of the scene. Okay, so we're going to take my footage and just put it to the side right now, and grab that vivid blue and put it behind my footage just for the keying. So we're going to put the keyer on top of my footage, and the Final Cut key works really well, but I like to fine tune it a bit. So if we go up here, we can kind of look at our matte view and see if there's any areas that aren't getting keyed out properly. You can also use the fill holes slider here too to help with that. And it's okay, except right around the bottom here, you can see on my legs, probably because of the shadow that I'm casting, there's some of the screen that's not getting keyed. So we're going to go into our original view and hit sample color. Now we're going to try and get a good area where there's the bright green as well as the dark green from the shadows, and just give the program a good idea of the range. And as you can see, this is a much cleaner key. Maybe use the fill hole slider a bit, and I would say that's pretty clean. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab that piece of footage, and we're going to put it in between the foreground and background clips. And as you can see, there's me in the scene. I'm in color and my footage isn't tracked yet, but we're going to fix all that. But first, I like to try and just get an idea for scale and positioning. So as you can see, I'm a little bit smaller than them. You kind of have to estimate because I'm behind them, but they're also, as you can see, the general is kind of leaning over a bit here. So I'm just going to try and get the scaling and positioning as accurate as I possibly can. The footage of me is a little bit longer than the clip here from the movie, which is okay. We're just going to bring it into the clip before it, which isn't too bad. It just means that I have to mask this shot here, just a few seconds of that shot, which shouldn't be too hard, but I'll get that done later. So this is where you can see that when I play the clip, the camera now starts moving. It starts tilting up, and the problem is that my footage obviously isn't linked to the movement of the camera. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the background clip here, and we're going to select trackers right at the bottom. And now we're going to find a spot in the shot that is stationary, doesn't have any independent movement, and has contrast. And this spot right here where this frame is with this glass, this is perfect because it has high contrast and this doesn't move independently. It moves with the camera. So that's what we're going to track, and then we're going to anchor that movement to my footage. So we're going to go over to the left side here and we're going to hit analyze, and that's going to analyze the whole clip. And as you can see, it's doing a really good job at tracking just that one spot. So now we're going to go down to the timeline and we're going to click on my footage. Now we're going to go over to our transform options and hit this little box here. And then in the middle of the frame, you'll see tracker with a drop-down menu. We'll hit object track, and that should link my footage to that tracker. So that looks really good. The only problem is that there's a bit of jitter on my footage, and that's from the tracker trying to analyze any rotation in the clip. So the way that we fix this is we go back over here to transform, and then at the top right, we hover over and we see this little box. That gives us this little drop-down menu, and we're gonna uncheck rotation. And then when we play it back, it looks perfect. Okay, so now we're going to try and match the cinematography the best that we can. It's not gonna be perfect, but that's okay. We're gonna go into our effects, and we're gonna take a black and white. We're gonna put that over top of my footage. Then we're going to take an aged film effect. We're gonna put that over top of the footage too. And then in our aged film adjustments, we're gonna take the color adjust slider, and we're gonna move that from a 1 to a -1. We're also going to get rid of the scratches. We don't want any scratches or dust or hair, but we do want the grain because the footage from the movie has grain. So my footage is in 4K. The footage from the movie is obviously not 4K. Plus, you'll notice there is some, artifacting that comes with video compression on that footage. I haven't really tried to mimic that perfectly because I think I would have to actually compress my footage first and try some stuff with that, and I just really don't want to go through all that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to add a slight blur. So I'm going to take a Gaussian blur, put it on my footage, and you don't need much. Even just 1.5 is enough just to blur it slightly, and that way it just blends in a bit more. So the only other way to really match up the exposure here is if we had the exact same lighting setup as the movie, which we don't. I do have a hair light from the top left coming down, but they seem to have a lighting setup which has a light coming straight down on top of their heads, but that's okay. I mean, I'm not going to readjust my lighting to match this because quite frankly, I worked on this video long enough as it is, so we're just going to go with what we got, and we're going to adjust our exposure. So we're going to take our shadows and we're going to move that down a bit. Just compare it to the original footage here. The original footage isn't too crazy in terms of contrast, so this isn't too hard to match up, but we're just going to fine tune it. It doesn't take much, but if we just a little bit on the shadows, a little bit on the mids, and raise the highlights up, that should be good. Now, what we can do, because there's a light coming straight down on top of Sally's head, it would stand to reason that if I was standing behind her, there would be some spill on my left shoulder and the left side of my chest. So we can go into the exposure and we can add a shape mask. And now this shape mask, I am going to adjust it to just cover the left side of me, just kind of like my left shoulder. Then I'm going to punch up the highlights inside of that mask really high, so it almost gives the appearance that there's a light shining down on the left side of my body. Now the only thing really left to do is just to mask this shot here, as well as I want to do some minor adjustments just on this shot. In terms of her hair, I'm not entirely satisfied with the masking around it, so I'm going to have to go back and refine that a little bit, but that's pretty much it. So here's what the final product looks like once all is said and done.
I didn't know pilots were allowed to do things like that.
Not Air Force pilots, you're right. But Mitch is an electronics engineer. He may work for the government, but man, he kind of makes his own rules.
Yeah, plus, he's super cool. I heard that he owns a leather jacket. Yeah.
Now, this was a situation where I was not happy with the audio recording of this shot, and the reason is because when I shoot my show, I'm using a shotgun mic, and I'm usually standing facing the shotgun mic, so it sounds fine. But in this shot, I've turned away from the microphone to draw on the map, and the microphone isn't picking up my voice as well, so I felt the audio was just kind of inconsistent, and I wasn't happy with it. So I'm going to play a piece from each original unedited clip so you get an idea of what I'm talking about.
I mean, just look at this. Just because it started here and then went to here and then here doesn't mean that it did so in a spiral fashion. I mean, yeah, it started here, but maybe it went from here, to here, and then maybe then it kind of like dropped down and looped around, and then...
So what I did, and I do this sometimes, it's what I like to call the poor man's ADR, which is basically I export the clip to my phone, then I go back into my studio and stand facing the microphone and try and re-record the dialogue. So I'll listen to the clip on my phone with earbuds, and then I'll try and repeat what I said in the clip the exact same way with the exact same timing. It may not be the best way to dub something over, but I find that it actually works quite well. So I'm going to go to one of the takes, and I'm going to hit Control-Shift-S to separate the sound. Then I'm going to take that sound bite, and I'm going to put it under the original clip and just try and line up the waveforms the best that I can. The same goes for the next shot with the close-up of the map. The advantage here is that I don't have to worry about syncing up the words to my lips like I did in the first one. And finally, I really wanted to get the sound effect of the marker drawing on the map. I know this may seem like a really small thing, but I really felt like just the sound of the marker drawing on the map just added to the comedy. So again, I exported the original clip to my phone and watched it as I just kind of drew along on some paper just to get that isolated sound of the marker. And now I have just the sound effect of the marker, which is great because now I can either increase or decrease the volume as I see fit, and I just have to line it up with the original clip. And after it's all pieced together, this is the final result.
I mean, just look at this. Just because it started here and then went to here and then here doesn't mean that it did so in a spiral fashion. I mean, yeah, it started here, but maybe it went from here to straight over here, and then maybe it went down, maybe it dipped, it wanted to take a peek at Saskatchewan, then went right back up, and then went straight over here, and then straight down here.
Okay, now this skit, which I like to call the slideshow skit, is the longest skit in this video, and although there's not as much masking as the first skit, it still took a really long time to create because there's just so many different pieces going on. So whenever I'm watching these movies, I always think to myself, wouldn't it be funny if this happened? And in this scene, I thought, it's such a serious scene, they're all in here trying to see these pictures of this monster. Wouldn't it be funny if, in contrast, someone came in with their own photographs and they were totally not appropriate. But not only that, but the character is totally clueless as to the seriousness of the situation. So I kind of came up with the idea of the photographer, and some of you may have noticed in the first skit, my character is carrying a camera. Now, if there are any hardcore photography purists out there, you might notice that this camera, I think they started making it in 1964 and this movie came out in 1957, but whatever. This was the oldest camera I could find. And I just wanted to throw in that piece to kind of plant the seed of this character, the photographer. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a snapshot of this freeze frame. I'm going to be using the actual footage of this shot for the beginning of the skit, but I want the freeze frame because I know I'm going to use it later on. Now I'm going to cut this footage right after the shot of the monster. Now I'm going to extend the cut a bit and just save the sound from it because I want the sound to carry over into the screenshot, which I'm going to put right after the cut. So I'm going to take my screenshot from my folder, which I named Projector Room, and I'm going to drag it onto the timeline and put it after the cut. And then, like I said, I'm just going to put that audio underneath it so it carries over. Now, the audio is obviously going to cut here at the end, and it's going to sound kind of jarring. So I'm going to, like I did before, going to hold the Option key, and I'm going to create a couple of keyframes here just to fade the audio so it's not so much of a hard cut. So right away, I'm just going to take this still frame, I'm going to copy and paste it and put the duplicate on top because I know I'm going to be using it in a few minutes. Now I'm going to make two cuts at the beginning and the end of the piece of footage where I walk into the scene. And then I'm going to copy and paste it and put one on top of the other. So now I'm going to take the footage of me and get it into the position that I want. Then I'm going to take the effects that I used for my last skit, copy them, and apply it to the footage of me that I'm going to be using in this skit. Then I'm going to mask around everybody that I need to mask around. There's not much movement in this footage, so the masking isn't going to take nearly as long as it did before. Okay, so the next shot is going to be me standing beside the projector screen. So we need to move me from behind the projector to in front of the projector. And I don't want it to be a hard cut because that will just look weird to go from me standing back here to me suddenly standing beside the screen. So we're going to find a shot to cut to in between that. So I'm going to pick this tighter shot of Mitch and Sally here. And I'm going to scale that up a bit. Then I'm going to take my footage and scale that just to try and match it proportions wise. And then I'm even going to throw in some footage of the general. I'm going to pick this footage here and then I'm going to zoom in, just scale it really big so that it's pretty much just the general and this guy beside him. Okay, so the next shot is me standing in front of the projector screen, but here's the problem. Even when we take the footage that I'm going to use of me and we scale it up, the screen is still too big. So I took a still frame of just the projector screen and we're going to open it up in Photoshop and we're going to try and create more of the room here. Now I am by no means a Photoshop master at all, but I do know some basic things. And really all we're going to do here is we're just going to take pieces of the walls that exist beside the screen and we're going to try to extend them just by cutting and pasting pieces of them next to each other. And then I'm just going to take the healing tool and try and heal over it the best that I can. Try and make it look half decent. I'm going to try and add a little bit of texture to it. And in the end, this doesn't look perfect by any means. It doesn't look great, but it's going to be okay because in Final Cut, I'm going to add some adjustments to it. I'm going to put a vignette on the screen and play with the adjustments on that a little bit. And then I'm going to adjust the exposure on my footage. Now that looks okay, but it's still not finished. I'm going to put an adjustment layer over top of everything once it's been compiled. I want to put the back of Sally's head kind of in the foreground, covering part of the photo of me. So I'm going to mask her out and then I'm going to flip it so it's backwards. And then I'm going to just do a defocus on it and turn down the exposure completely. Okay, now for the actual slide of me, we're just going to position that into place. And then I'm going to apply a shape mask to it just to kind of round the edges and make it look more like a slide. Then I'm going to apply the aged paper effect. And we don't need this at 100%, just maybe about half. And then I'm going to play with the exposure a bit, just take down the shadows and the highlights. And I think that looks pretty good. So I still wasn't completely satisfied with how Sally's head looked in the foreground. So I searched around and I found a picture of a somewhat similar hairstyle and I played around with this for a while. It just didn't feel right in the end. So finally I decided, you know what, screw it. I'm just gonna go back into the studio. I put on a wig. It's not perfect. Obviously it's not the exact same hairstyle and the wig looks a lot better from the back than it does in the front. I put on a light jacket and just kind of squeezed my shoulders in to look a little more slender. And quite honestly, this footage, after it's keyed and adjusted, I think just that bit of movement adds so much more to this, and I think it looks a lot better. So the shot right after this has Sally gasping, and in the original footage, she let out an audible gasp. But the problem was the sound in the original clip had music in it as well. So I just wanted the sound of the gasp, so I recorded myself gasping. Then I took that sound clip, put it underneath, and applied a pitch filter, and just adjusted the pitch to be higher, and that way it sounded a lot more feminine. So since Mitch is sitting so close to Sally, it would make sense that he would be in the foreground shot too. So what I did is I just threw on a suit jacket and just tried to pose the same way he was posing, and then I just applied the same effects that I added to the shot that was supposed to be the back of Sally's head. Now the shot right before this one is of the general standing there with his hands on his hips. So I tried to do the same thing. I put on a jacket and I stood there in the same pose, and just since he's kind of moving slightly, I started moving slightly. And then again, I just did the same thing with the others. I applied the same effects and positioned it. The other thing I wanted to add was the sound effect of the slide projector. Now this slide projector is not a carousel slide projector. In fact, those weren't even made until a few years after this movie came out. But, you know, I've always felt that for whatever reason, the carousel slide projector and the sound of it is just so iconic. And the sound actually, I feel, adds to the comedy of the scene. So what I did is I just took a remote and taped a USB cable to it to give the impression that I was using a carousel slide projector. And then I searched for the sound effect. And not only did I find the sound effect of the mechanism, but I actually found the sound effect of the room tone of just the projector running, which was perfect. So I could lay over that sound of the projector running as room tone over the entire scene. And then I took the sound effect of the slides changing and even added it to the original footage so that it would all blend together. The final thing to add was an adjustment layer over everything, because the effects added to the adjustment layer will affect everything underneath it. So on the adjustment layer, I put the effects of aged film, a vignette, and a slight blur. And on the aged film effect, I included scratches and hair and dust this time so that it all blends together and it looks like it's part of the same footage. And this is the final result.
Oh my God! These pictures suck! It's a lot of focus. You know, if you guys wanted someone to take photos, you could have just asked me. Been known to dabble in some photography myself. You know, I mean, I could probably show you if you. In fact, I think, oh, look at that! I even have some of my own slides right here. I might as well. Now, these are just some examples of my work, but recently I've been experimenting with some very tasteful nude photography. Oh, that's right, Sally. That's all me. Just you wait, I'm only getting started.
This film and all the information pertaining to it and the bird are classified as top secret.
Oh no, you can tell other people. I am not shy when it comes to my bird, as you can see. In fact, if you want to see more, I have others. Like close-ups.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this inside look into the editing that it took to create this episode. There's going to be a new episode of Weird Movies with Mark this Sunday. And as usual, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you all next time.